So to start out, we're going to launch Visual Studio 2019. And we do need the latest version of 2019 for this to be able to work. A lot of the worker services code shipped, but basically for a lot of the .NET Core 3.0 functionality, you need not quite the most recent, but close to it. So you might as well just download the very most recent that you can get. We're going to say create a new project. And we're going to look for a worker service. And so it should be right on the front here. So here is our worker service here for this template. We're going to name it, let's call this one Availability Tracker. And we can say that, and we'll say create. And we will say create. And it's finished. And so you can see we get two pretty small files. So we get a program.cs, which is where our main method lives. And so just some simple worker service .NET Core 3.0 boilerplate. And then if we go to worker.cs, we see we have a little logger code. And then we just have this while loop. So this while loop is just going to keep running. You can see that it's got a delay of 1,000 milliseconds there. And so it's just going to, from the moment you start this, it's going to just keep running in a loop. Give it a second to load up. And so that's running just fine. So the first thing we'll do is just show you how do you get this wired up with very basic application insights. Now, I would be remiss if I did not say that there is a brand new NuGet package specific for worker services. So it's designed to be lightweight and to work really well with worker services. I'm first going to show you how to do it not with this package, just because it was how I learned how to do it first. But the next video I'm going to walk through specific to this package, how to use it. But just know this doc is out there. If you're doing this, this is where you will want to start going forward. But for what I'm doing, I want it so simple. So this adds in things like live metrics, the ability to have heartbeats. So there's a lot of extra functionality that you get with this. I'm just going to be turning on the most basic, just so I can do a track call. So I don't need to go quite this far yet, but I will do that in the next video. So the first thing we want to do is we'll go to project and manage NuGet packages. And we don't want installed, we want to browse, we want to make sure our package source is NuGet.org, and we're going to say Microsoft.application, if I could spell right, which I clearly cannot. And we'll see if we get application insights. And so we just want to add this here, and we will say install. And we will say OK. And then accept. And it looks like we are all set. So we're going to go to worker.cs. So the first thing we're going to do here is add our application insight specific using statements. So we'll do a use Microsoft.application insights. We'll do a using Microsoft.application insights.extensibility. And then we will also need one for data contracts as well. So we'll add that. There we are. And so now we need to go and create our initial telemetry client. We don't want to do that inside this while loop, because we'll want to actually track the telemetry within the while loop, but we don't want to keep creating telemetry clients over and over again unless we had some very specific reason for doing so. So we'll say telemetry client, or actually in this case we want telemetry configuration. So we'll grab telemetry configuration, and we can name that configuration, and we'll say equals telemetry configuration dot create default. And so depending on your application type, you wouldn't use this method necessarily, but since this is essentially like a console application, this is one way of doing it. Again, there's the new worker service doc. We'll walk through that in the next video, but just showing you an alternative that's still out there. we're going to specifically give it an instrumentation key. For right now, I'm going to leave this blank. I'm going to go back and create a new resource in a second. And then we want to create our telemetry client. And that will be new telemetry client. And then we're going to pass to that configuration. And so this is our basic code that we need. And then if we want it to actually do something down here, which is probably helpful, is let's go and give it telemetry client dot track event, and we can give it a super basic event and just say hello world. We'll also do a telemetry client dot flush just to force it to send that event immediately. Let's increase this duration. Right now it's every 1,000 milliseconds. Let's make it every 10,000. And we can do save. And so right now, if we do this, it's not going to successfully send. We'll still see it trying to send, but it's not going to have an instrumentation key, so it's not going to be able to go anywhere. You can see we are running, and you can see, so there is our attempt at sending our telemetry, but you can see it's coming across as unconfigured, and that's because if we scroll over to IKey, there's not going to be one there, and so that's why, is that there's no IKey filled in. So we're going to stop this. We're going to grab a instrumentation key, make a new one. So let's go here. Let's create a new application insights resource. Say add new. We'll call this, we'll just put an existing resource group since I've already got one. We'll give this availability tracker as its name. US West 2, let's change it somewhere else. US East 2. It didn't like availability tracker. Let's say availability tracker new. And review and create, and then create. And all we're creating this resource for is just to have a container to send that telemetry to, so then we'll be able to visualize it, we can alert off of it, because without an existing instrumentation key, it's just we're kind of collecting it and sending it nowhere, which is not particularly useful. And it's now complete, so we can go to resource. And all we want to grab from here is this instrumentation key. And it's important to remember this, that like, the name key is a bit of a misnomer. It's really more like an ID. Think of this as like your email address. So this allows us to get the telemetry to our inbox. It doesn't, no one can, with this key, no one can do any sort of reading of your data or anything like that. It's just it allows the ability to go and send mail, send telemetry, to your mailbox, to your application insights resource. Now, certainly you can have a concern with it from a spam standpoint, the same way you do with email, so it's possible someone could spam you if they wanted to. But there's not the same security concern you would normally associate with the word key. And so we will not paste in the entire text, but just the string of the key itself. And we'll say control save, and we'll start that up again just to make sure that we know what we're doing and that things are working. And so next time when we see telemetry go by, it should go by, but it should not say unconfigured. And we see it is now going through. Unconfigured is gone, and it has our I key right there. So if we then go back to the portal, we should be able to see if any of this is starting to come through in the next minute or so. Let's go, because we haven't configured, so we're not using the specialized worker service package, this doesn't wire up live metrics. So even though we're sending data, we're not actually talking to live metrics with how I've configured it right now. So the only way we'd be able to see if we've got stuff going across is we can go into logs. And in this log analytics query space that they keep renaming on us whenever they possibly can, we'll check custom events, and we can say let's say where app name does not equal null, just so we grab anything that's there. And we don't have anything yet. It might want that in quotes since it's giving me little red underlines of doom. There we go. So we have our first hello world that came in. You can see the other information that it grabbed at that time. SDK version, my local desktop is getting written to Cloud Roll instance. You can see I'm based in the general Virginia region. And well, now let's go back to this. So the next thing that we can do to kind of build this up a little bit is to just quick show you the code changes that are required to go and turn this into a Windows service. So to be able to go and turn this into a Windows service, the first thing we need to do is go back and actually add another NuGet package. And so in this case, we're going to add Microsoft dot, and you can see I found it recently before, Microsoft.extensions.hosting.windows services. And we're going to say install. And we're going to say OK and accept. And once we have that, we're going to go to program.cs and we're going to make one tiny change. And we're going to say dot use Windows service like that. And that's all we actually have to do to make this compatible so it can run as a Windows service. Now to show you that and prove that to you, let's first go and publish this. And we'll just say publish. And let's just do it to a folder. So we're just going to drop it in this path. We will say publish. We successfully published our project. We are going to then go and find that path. Okay, so here's our availability tracker.exe. We can also go and if we want to quick run a command, and let's just try running that outside of Visual Studio just to make sure everything is still working the way you expect it to. So let's do availability tracker.exe. And we can see again, we're starting up fine. Everything is working. And with each one of those flips of the loop, every 10 seconds we have them set to at the moment, we can go and more telemetry would be sent. So if we were to come back here, you can see we now have a bunch more telemetry that came in and finally came through. But we're now sending more. We're going to go back to here. We can do Control C. So this is interesting, but this is still just running a command prompt. This is not really useful to us. We want to turn this into a service. And since we made those other changes in Visual Studio, all we have to do is say sc create, and then we're going to come up with the name of our new service. So we're going to, for this one, just say my really cool service. Really just to demonstrate that this can be whatever name you want it to be. And then we're going to do bin path equals and then quotes. And this is going to go to the path that we have our file in. And we'll paste that in and we need to point it to our availability tracker. It really likes auto-completing to that other file, .exe. And then if I did not type an error there. So the answer is I had a space between bin path and equals if you look up here, and it does not like that and saw that as the command had stopped, which is why it then started giving us a, hey, here's how you use the command, and you can see it very clearly indicates that the command is bin path equals, not bin path space equals. So we've now created our service. If we go to services and we'll look for, I ended up going to a much shorter service name. We might need to refresh this to see them. My service right here. And we can now go and start this up. And this service now running in the background is going to repeatedly be feeding hello worlds to our project. Now that in of itself is not that interesting, not that useful, so we don't really care. We can kill that my service. But the key thing that is incredibly cool here is all we had to do was add one NuGet package to the worker service and add .use Windows services or .use Windows service, and we have the ability to, with a single administrative command prompt command, turn this into a fully functioning service that's just going to sit in the background. It can start at boot, it can run, and takes away, gets out of the way for you a lot of kind of boilerplate code that you'd normally have to deal with and come up with yourself and figure out how to make work. So what we're going to do now is we'll get rid of this, which is not necessarily something we really need to be doing right here. We'll leave this for right now because this can still work. And so what we'll do is we're going to take the code that was originally from this Azure function, and I've cleaned it up a little bit, and I'm going to show you what that ends up looking like cleaned up. And so you can see we've got HTTP client, so we need to add a using statement. Let's see if it can find it for me. It cannot, because that would be fun and useful. Let's see, did they have to put the using statements in here? And so it's probably that we need to add using .NET HTTP. Let's try that. And we still need stopwatch as well. Let's try using system.diagnostics. And our little telemetry client track trace here has lingered on. And what we want to do, and so this is with a hard-coded URL. So it's very similar to what we have here still. So we've not really added a whole lot of functionality. All we're doing is taking it out of the needing to run in an Azure function. I did also change around a little bit. So I removed the content match. So this one had the ability to do a content match where it was checking to see what was let's grab that real quick. Yeah. So right here, it was looking for specific content, but there wasn't a way to turn that on and off. So ultimately, I'll add it back into mine. But for now, I just pulled out that code and pulled it out from an OR statement below, just to make it a little bit easier to work with. And I think for the most part, otherwise, it's very, very similar. And so let's try running this now. As you can see, it's just going to be hitting my blog that we've hard-coded in. And we are syncing, but still running a little bit slow. Let's bring this up. There we go. Okay, so you can see it is pinging opsconfig.com. We can go to here and find out, well, let's go to this one. That other one is already open. And so in this case, this is all going to go under availability results. So we'll go and look for any availability results telemetry as it comes in. And so what we should also see, we don't even actually have to look here. We could go straight to availability here. And as soon as it starts getting, so yep, you can see that first blip coming in. So that's our first little bit of telemetry coming across from that. And that would also populate on the main view here as well. We should see a nice 100%. But what we should see happening is start seeing more, if we go to the scatter plot, start seeing more dots start to come over time. We'll bring it down to 30 minutes to make it a little bit easier to see as they come through. But because each time, so we've sent 2 so far, but each time it runs through that loop, it's going to go and send another. And what we can do to speed that up is, let's go down here and find our wait statement. That is right here. So let's crank that down to 1,000. And then give it a run again. And you can see first telemetry item sent. It's now going to wait for that 1,000, and then it's going to send again. And so you can see down here, for whatever reason, the console windows being a little bit laggy, you can see everything that's being sent down in the output window is giving us a much better what's actually happening. So you can see each of those telemetry items going across and being sent. And if we go back to our other view, we should see a few more dots. There we are. And so the nice thing with this is, one, you can adjust this. Like by default, the availability tracking that you get to the portal is, I believe, 5, 10, 15-minute intervals as far as how frequently. So test frequency, yeah, 5, 10, 15. With this, it's really as rapidly as you'd like to test, and certainly as rapidly as the test can realistically respond. So if you're looking, and my blog is clearly fairly slow and not very well resourced, so occasionally we're getting responses that take 4 seconds, so I certainly wouldn't want to be trying to hit my blog every 5 seconds. Probably 60 seconds would be a good minimum, where I'm finding out pretty quickly that my site is down, but not necessarily being at all close to how long, theoretically, in a worst case scenario, my site can ever perform, because my site is really poorly resourced. But you could bring this down to 30 seconds or 10 seconds because you're running it on your own hardware. So really there's no restriction. It's just what you end up finding is a good fit for your site, where you're not getting false positives. And also, certainly, the more data and telemetry you send across to Application Insights, the more you're storing, the more it costs. So there is a certain cost-benefit analysis to be done of, is it better to do once a minute versus once every 30 seconds or 10 seconds, because it's going to cost you less to go once a minute, and you may still be getting just as high fidelity data and even less noise in many cases. You can see this still running along. This, again, I don't know why this the command prompt decided to go, and it's just kind of the console window has died, but we could see from here that all that telemetry kept sending, kept running, and being fine. So with this, we could, at this point, if we wanted, go back to publish, push this out, and then come back down to an administrative command prompt. Let's do command and run as administrator. And we could do another SC create and create a new service that's based on our newly published. Normally, you wouldn't be publishing it over and over again. You'd have kind of your final, and then you'd move that to a location that's other than your dev box. But for what I'm doing right here, so we're not going to use my service. We're going to create a brand new one. We will go and get that location. So this is, again, bin release is where that's being published to at the moment. And so I will say SC create. Availability tracker service v1, and then we want to do bin path equals no space, and give it that path I just copied, and then give it the name of our exe that is in there, and that's just based on the file that I created. So if we look here, this is availability tracker is the exe file, and close that with a quote, and we can see our service was created successfully. We'll refresh here, and we can go back to here and see we should have our availability tracker service v1. And we can tell it to start. And so you could certainly, once you make a final version of this, change the nature of the service, have it, if it ever fails, to go and restart itself. Then if it failed again, you could have it go do something else. Right now, this is running as a local system. Ultimately, we don't want to do that. You'd want to have it have a service account that you could restrict the permissions down as much as you want. But for now, just for testing, local system is fine. But ultimately, any sort of production use. And you could also change the startup type. So if you want this to start automatically, we can have it start automatically. So we are now running. This is now running in the background. Back to here and refreshing. And so now we're running just consistently. We've got it running as a service in the background. And we can go and check and make sure that it's actually hitting the site that we want. Yep, it's hitting opsconfig. And it was getting 200 successful responses. And show all. So yeah, that is working as we would want to. So this kind of showed you the basic mechanics of getting this working, but you can then immediately start thinking of, well, what are some other things that we would really want to see here? Like, I don't want this to be just loading a single site. I really want this to be able to be multiple sites, because it doesn't make sense to have an individual service running for every single site. It makes much more sense to have a single availability service and then, let's say, feed it a list of 100 sites that I want it to go and test in my internal network, and then it can go and do that, or external network as well. And so the first thing we can do, so what we can do is, let's try to, instead of having a string URI, let's go and just pass in a array. So let's do a string array, and we can call this a couple of sites to test. So we'll say opsconfig.com. We can say Microsoft.com, and let's say Bing. So we have an array now. So rather than pass a single value and say for each string address in addresses, 2Ds, and we'll grab this and bring it up a level. We're going to call this, and we're going to pass an address. Now we can go and run this and test. So you can see we're hitting opsconfig, we're hitting Microsoft, we're hitting Bing. You can see that happening down here as well. And so our console window is updating and working again. And so this is still very simple and not quite doing what we want, because while this gives us the ability to hard code in more addresses, at this point we're still putting the work for, basically you have to edit the code to be able to go and add in these addresses. So ideally what we'd want to do is have some sort of config file that we could read from to be able to get these addresses, rather than have to go and just read that array, and anytime someone wants to edit this, having to go open up the code and change it. So let's comment out this line, and what we can do is really the simplest of all being able to, like, the easiest thing to do as far as reading a config file. Let's go and we will make a file that we will call config.txt, and you can see I've created some before in the other project. And we're going to go to our availability tracker, and we'll give it the config.txt, and we will save it here. And so in this, let's, rather than have to deal with any complex data structures or do anything too crazy, we're just going to do the same thing we were doing before. But now the values, rather than having these three values in an array, we're going to have them in a file, but just each on their own line, make it really super easy to deal with. And just for now, for example purposes, and we'll say Microsoft.com, and we'll say Bing.com. And so now we've got our little config file. We've got that saved up. And so we need to figure out a way to read from our config file. So probably what I want to do is add system.io, and a using statement would be helpful. Add in system.io. So now that we've added system.io, let's go and give it a path to our newly created config file. And then config path equals, and we'll say directory dot get current directory. Not the most robust way of doing this, but just for our simple point. And we'll say endpoint addresses, and we'll say equal file dot read all lines. And what we want to do is feed into this our config path. So it's going to need our config.txt. We can then close that out. And this needs that there and that there. So this is just going to get the current directory, and in this case I'm storing it here. Once we go to toss this in release and bin, I need to make sure that file exists there as well. And so we're then going to read that file. Let's make a list, and we'll do list string. Well, we can call it URI if we want, and say new list of strings. Then we'll go for each string line in endpoint addresses, and then we want to go and do URI dot add, and we'll add each of those lines. So we're just basically reading our little file that we created before. So we've got our little config.txt file with just 3 things right there. We read each line, we go through that, and we add those to just a basic list data structure. And then we need to go and say for each string address in, this is going to be just URI, is our new list of strings, and then that should work. And now let's try this again, and we'll do save, and we can run that. And so now, just like before when we were reading from our array, now we're reading from a list, which is being read from a file. And again, sending those across, let's go and add a couple of values to our file just to make sure that, so let's do https xbox.com, https docs.microsoft.com, and we will save this, and we'll jump back here, and we will do play again. And Microsoft, Bing, Xbox, Docs, as we expected. So we did actually have one test fail, so that was kind of cool. We're getting a test failure on, is that on Bing? Who is failing? We'll be able to see the failures, but there is a little bit of a lag. And there is our failures, so let's see what those were. So it looks like the failure that we're getting was actually Xbox.com. So if you look here, we're seeing a 301, so 30, and the responses with moved. So what that most likely means is we hit a 301 redirect, and so we hit Xbox.com, and rather than giving us a 200 success code, the first thing it did was probably redirect me to en-us based on my IP address. And in doing that for this type of test, this went, and because our criteria is if it's not a 200 success, then we treat it as a failure. This comes back as an error. You could go and adjust that logic in the code, so you could go and have it be able to handle that if you wanted to, depending on, and this is where kind of knowing how your sites are going to respond and also testing your sites before you go and set up alerts with something like this, because certainly if a lot of your sites are doing 301 redirects, then you either need to add additional logic or you need to know to expect that and know how to handle it. So I think this is probably a good place to stop. And so the last thing I will say is any of the code that we went through, or at least kind of the final incarnation up until this point of the code, you can go and grab on GitHub, and I'll throw a bit.ly link in the video to make it a little bit easier to get here, but it's just github.com, Mr. Bullwinkle, availability-watcher. And then if you want to look at that code that we've been messing around with, almost all of it is just in the worker.cs here. And so you can see all that. There's a tiny bit extra. I'd added the ability for it to read an I key from a second config file. Really nothing fancy. Again, this is all test toy code just to be able to play around with. And as well, keep in mind the program.cs, that one important line of .use Windows service, which gives us the ability to go and do an sc create command with the bin path equals, and then be able to go and create a service that you could deploy on any computer that's running Windows, really, or at least that's running Windows and capable of running .NET Core 3.0 runtime. And so that's all for now. If you like this video, please give it a like. And then for the next video, I'll walk through how to do kind of this same process, but to also be able to have live metrics, to be able to have a heartbeat and be able to alert on when there's not a heartbeat. And that will be all based on using the new Application Insights NuGet package for worker services. So thank you so much and have a great night.